Hey, welcome to Blender Gunpla, the series where we're looking at how to use Blender to model custom 3D printable parts for your Gunpla kits. And last time we talked about vents, so I have printed out here one of the vents that we created. It's blown up quite a bit larger than you would normally want to put on a Gunpla kit, but we can look at this and see, here's what we created last time, and I've had a couple of questions regarding what we did, and so I wanted to cover those before we move on to a brand new topic. So in today's video, we're gonna take this and we're gonna answer a couple of questions about it. Specifically, these slats or fins that we have inside the vent here, in all of the variations that we created last time, were just straight vertical. So you can see down through them to the space behind. And somebody asked, what if we want these to be more at an angle? Because a lot of vents that you see, or vent detail that you see on Gunpla kits, those vents are sitting at an angle instead of just straight vertical. So that's the first thing we're gonna look at today. And then secondly, what if we want the outer shape of this thing to be something more interesting than just a rectangle, right? So maybe you're trying to fit this into like one of the hollow back sides of a high-grade kit's skirt piece, and so you need some sort of unusual shape to fit in there, or maybe you want a round vent or some sort of other shape that fits specifically into a space on your kit. So what if we want to do that, and how do we make the slats work so that they stay within that unusual shape? Those are the two main things that we're going to look at today as we continue with looking at how to customize our vent pieces. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are in Blender again, and I've loaded that very first simple vent that we created in the previous episode. So we'll use this as a starting place to answer our question about how do we create angled slats inside of our vent. So if you remember how these were, we just created this one rectangular slat and then we replicated it a bunch of times. So you might, as a first attempt, decide, oh, if I want this to be at an angle, I just rotate it, right? So if I rotate this around the x-axis, I can get it to be an angle. The problem is that when I rotate this down to an angle like this, the axis that it's replicating along also rotates, and so all the copies end up jumping outside of the frame like this. So I'm going to cancel out of that because that approach is not going to work for us, and it's not going to be easy to replicate this along that axis and have it work out like we want it to. So instead, let's hit tab and go into edit mode on these slats. And I'm gonna hit Alt-Z real quick to make this thing partially transparent so we can see through it and see what's going on. If you remember, these slats are really just this rectangle that we created that then we solidified to add some thickness to it. So it would be pretty easy for us to grab just these top 2 points on our rectangle here and shift them over along the y-axis to give it an angle. So I'm going to move those along the y-axis and I'm going to move them this way. Now you'll see everything spreads out a lot because the width of these things is growing, and so that's changing how our array modifier works, but we can fix that in just a minute. So we'll get this to an angle that we like. Maybe this looks like about 45 degrees, and I'll lock that in. And now let's Alt-Z again to turn the transparency back on. If we tab back out of here and we go back to our array modifier, we can switch the axis to the y-axis, and then we can hold control down and drag our mouse to drop the offset back down. So we can pull these in like so, and maybe I want to pull them in about that far, and then we'll move the whole thing along the y-axis this way just to kind of center it back up. And then we have this type of event with angled slats. Now, there still is some space. If you look just the right angle here, you can see that they're still really just rectangles. They're just tilted on an angle. So that may, again, still not be exactly what you're after. And for me, I'm not super happy with how this turned out. And so what I'd rather do is just delete these slats and create some brand new ones in an entirely different way. So let's do that. Let's select these guys and just delete them. And we'll start over with the fins and create something a little bit different. But before we do that, I want to make this frame a little bit shorter. So I'm going to change the profile extrude that we did, and I'm going to drag this down just so it's not quite so tall. I want to make a flatter looking vent with these angled slats in it. And while we're here, actually, let's make the outside frame also just a little bit thicker, beefier, like so. You know what? Let's weight it outside of the, yeah, this seems better. That way we've got more room inside of it to work on. So something like this will be the shape of our outer frame. Now we'll create some angled vents to go inside of this. And so to do that, what I want to do is start off in the side view mode here. So we're looking at it straight from the side. I'm going to hit Alt-Z again to make this semi-transparent. And we're going to do what we usually do with ND when we're creating a brand new shape, and that is we're going to start a sketch. So I'm going to go up here to the sketch menu and I'm going to choose single vertex, and that'll create us a point here on the origin point. And we'll extrude this out to create the shape that we're after. So what I would like for this vent to do from the side view, right, is I want to extrude it kind of up this way so we get that angled slat. I don't want it to go all the way up. I'm gonna hold down Control so that it snaps to the grid. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm just gonna freeform it. So I'm gonna go up at an angle about like this. I don't want it to go all the way to the top of the frame, so I'm gonna leave it right about here. Then we're gonna extrude it only in the Y axis. So I'm gonna go this way just to give it a little bit of a horizontal flatness along the top edge. So it's not a sharp point that it's going to. So something like this. And then we're gonna extrude it again down along the Z axis, straight down. So we're gonna do something like this and go all the way back down to the 0 point here. Something like that. And then we'll use the ND menu and choose Make Manifold to fill that in, right? So now we have this shape, and it's just a flat shape drawn over here along our axis. But again, like we've done before, if we go back into object mode here, we can solidify this thing, right? So we go here, we go to extrusion, and we say solidify, and we want it to solidify only in a certain direction. This is the direction, and we pull it out here to fill that in, right? So I should have hit Alt-Z to get us back into solid mode so you could see that better as we were extruding it, but this is what we end up with, right? And so now we have this nicer shape to start out with, and then we can replicate this thing with our array modifier as we've done before. We want to replicate it along the Y axis, and we roll up a few of these, and then we roll down the offset by quite a lot so that they start to overlap. Right, so we can choose how much we want them to overlap, and that'll kind of change how deep the vent goes. Right, so maybe we like that, and then we'll roll the count up a couple more times. Seems good. So lock that in, and then we'll move it along the Y just a little bit to kind of fill in the rest of the space like this. And so now we have this type of event with these angled fins in it. So that kind of answers our first question. This is my preferred way of creating a vent with the angled slats. So instead of starting with a rectangle from this side and solidifying it across like that, instead we looked at the profile from this side and we created that angled shape we wanted, and then we solidified it in the other direction to create our solid slat that then we can replicate across. So I hope that made sense. I think that's the best way to create angled slats. So next, I think we'll take this as a starting point, and we'll look at how to create differently shaped outer frames around our vent. All right, so now moving on to the next question. What if we want the outer shape of this vent to be something more interesting than just this rectangle? And so we're gonna start with the rectangle here and modify it, but you wouldn't have to do this. You could sketch a brand new shape if you had a specific idea in mind. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna tab into this rectangle shape. We're gonna look at it from the top view, and I'm gonna just add some extra points by selecting some of these sides and subdividing them. And then that way it'll give us a few extra vertices to play with to make a more interesting shape here. So let's actually make the whole thing a little bit bigger by moving these up along the Y-axis like so, right? That seems good. And then we'll move these kind of over this way to create an angled shape. Let's move this one like down out of the way for a second. Yeah, move this along the X out this way. That seems good. So I'm trying to sort of make something that might be similar to the shape of a skirt piece maybe on a Gundam kit. So maybe something like this. And again, if you were trying to fit this in a specific place on a kit, you'd obviously want to take measurements and, you know, be very precise with the shape that you're creating. In this case, we'll just do something like this, right? So now we have, this is the shape that we're trying to fill in with a part, and we want these fin pieces of our vent to completely fill this thing out, but not to stick out from the edges in an unsightly way. And so we're gonna start actually by making them stick out from the edges, because that's the easiest thing to do. So we'll select them all, and the first thing we need to do is change our solidify modifier, because they are not obviously wide enough to fill in that space. So we want to pull these out, and not just to where they are here, but we want to make sure that they're at least wide enough to fill in even this area up here that sticks out even further to the side. So like that's way too far, but something like this. And again, if you were in top view, you could see that probably better. But yeah, that'll definitely be wide enough to fill in this area up here. And then we also want to go back into our array modifier. So we replicate array and hit A to change the axis to the y-axis. And then we're going to roll the count up on these copies to at least fill in that space like so, right? So now we have, and that didn't quite fill in there, so I'm going to move this whole thing along the y-axis and just kind of move it up like this to make sure that we're filling in the space entirely. All right, there we go. So now that's looking pretty good. It's filling in the space, but obviously it's sticking out from the edges of the space as well. And so we're going to want to fix that. And in order to do that, we need to use a Boolean modifier. So ND provides nice shortcuts for us to do. Let me show you here. So under the Booleans menu, there's difference, union, intersection. There's also some other things as well. But this allows you to take two objects and either, you know, cut one away from the other, or combine both of them together, or pick the area where the two intersect. And that's what we're going to use here, because we want to kind of define the shape of the interior of this thing, and then just take the intersection of that with our fins. That'll remove the part that's sticking outside of the shape. So to create this shape, we already have the shape, right? It's this shape of the frame. If we go back into edit mode on this thing, we can see, you know, this is the shape we want to potentially use as our cutter to cut away the outside of these fins. The problem is we can't use this as a cutter in its current state. So let's go ahead and actually just make a copy of it, right? So I've got this frame selected. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. And what that does is it gives me a copy that's by default in movement mode, so I can move it around. But if you right click, it cancels that movement, and then it drops it right in this exact same spot. So if you see over here in my object collection now, I have the original walls, and then I have my new copy, and they're sitting right on top of each other, so they don't look any different from one another. However, with this copy, what I want to do is go over here to my modifier stack panel and just delete all of the modifiers. So basically now I've got this copy, but it's just the outline. It doesn't have any of the three-dimensional modifiers that we've added to the actual frame itself. So the frame is here, our copy is here, it's just that shape. Now we can tab into edit mode for that shape, and we want to select all of the vertices and hit the F key, which allows us to make a face to fill that in. So now instead of just being the outline, it's actually a solid representation of that shape. Now I can tab back out of here and I have that shape. I'm gonna hit Alt Z again. We're toggling in and out of X-ray mode a lot, but it's just so we can see those points. And now that I've got this flat copy of my outer wall shape selected, I can solidify it. So we'll go into ND again, go to extrusion and solidify, and I'm just gonna drag this up, and I'm gonna make it nice and tall. Like the height here doesn't really matter, other than it just has to be taller than the vent that we're working with. And it's nice to make it, a little extra, nice and chunky here so that we can really see it very well. So now this is the shape that we want to take. Wherever this intersects with these vents, though, that's what we want to keep. And where they don't intersect, we want to throw that away. So we use the intersection modifier to do that. You want to select the object that you're using to cut away first. So that's this big chunky object we created. Then you hold down Shift and select your second object, the one that's going to be cut. And with both of those selected, then we hit Shift F2 to go into the ND menu, choose Booleans and choose intersection. And now only the part of those fins where they intersect with that outer shape that we created are still visible. So that's perfect. Now you'll notice it did a couple things with that cutter shape that we created. First of all, you're still seeing its wireframe here. Secondly, if you look over here in your scene collection, it created a brand new collection. ND does this by default, called utils, and it moved the thing in there. So that way you know all of your cutting objects that are just being used as utilities to operate on other things, they get moved into here for you. And you can either hit the H key for hide, or you can just click the little eyeball here, and that will remove the wireframe that you're seeing for that shape. So that fixes that problem. And now we can see this is the end result of our Boolean operation on our vent. So this is something you could use then to make, your vent any shape you want. You could make a circle and use that to cut away. You could make this unusual shape that we just created here and use that same technique to cut away your fins so that you end up with whatever shaped vent you want. And so I think with that will end our discussion of those two questions about vents, and we will move on to the next topic. All right, so that for now is going to conclude our look at vents. But before we move on to a new topic in the next episode, and if you've watched this far, I wanted to reward you with a little bit of bonus content. So let's do a quick project to see what we've learned so far. Right here, I have the high-grade Gundam Age FX kit. It's a nice little kit, by the way, for a high-grade. I like it a lot. But I haven't done any modifications or anything like that to it yet. And I've decided that down here on the leg, if I kind of move things out of the way, there's this area right here. I'll point at it with this toothpick. It's a trapezoid shape, and there's a hole right here so that you can put one of these effects parts into it, but I'm not going to use that in my final pose of this kit. So I'd like to actually fill this in and cover that hole that's right up there. And I was thinking we could create a trapezoidal shaped vent detail to fit right into here. So the plan here is to create a trapezoid shaped vent, have the frame, the outer edge of the vent only be on 3 sides. So this bottom edge of the widest part of the trapezoid will be open, and just the vent slats will be visible there. So frame on 3 sides, maybe 2 or 3 angled slats, kind of angled downwards toward the bottom part of the leg. And I'm gonna jump into Blender real quick and model that just from scratch to show you how I'd go about doing that using everything that we've learned so far in these last 2 episodes. But if you want to try it yourself, what I'd recommend is go ahead and pause the video just for a second, go into Blender yourself and do that exercise. Then you can come back and resume the video and see if what I do, how that compares to the way that you approached it. So let's make this little detail here to go on the leg of this HFX kit. So here we are. I've created a brand new empty Blender file, and let's make that trapezoid shaped vent. Now I'm not gonna worry about the exact dimensions of it. You know, again, if you were trying to fit that space exactly, you'd have to do some measurements and work on that. But what I'm gonna do first is just go into top mode here, and I'm just gonna draw what I think is approximately the shape we wanted. And I'm gonna do that here with the ND sketch tool. So I'm gonna create a vertex. I'm going to extrude it along the x-axis this way a bit. Let's just go to about there. And actually, I'm only gonna create half of this shape. So this is the first thing that's gonna be slightly different. I'm just gonna bring it up to like here. You know what, there was more of an angle to that. So we'll bring it up all the way to like here. Yeah. So this is half of our trapezoid shape. The other half obviously could be over here, but rather than drawing that and trying to get it exact, I can actually just mirror this thing, right? So I'm gonna hit Shift 2, and this is a modifier that we haven't used yet, but maybe you've looked around in the ND menu and you see it. If not, you're learning about it right now. Under the replicate menu, there is something called mirror. And so by default, it mirrors along the x-axis, which is exactly what we want. So that's perfect. So now we have our trapezoid shape here. And again, we would have to solidify it and profile extrude it. So let's do, first let's do the profile extrude to give it some vertical height. So we want it to go along the Z axis. We'll go this way. We'll change the weighting so that it's up above in the positive direction only. And we'll go, I don't know, maybe about that thick. And then we'll again solidify it. And we probably want it only inside of that shape, like so. So maybe something like that. That's probably way too tall. So we're gonna change that profile extrude and pull it down, I don't know, about like that. Right, so there's the basic shape. Now, this end needs to be flat this way, but we'll take care of that later on. So I'm not gonna worry about that just yet. So we'll go into the side view here. We'll create our fin pieces. So again, we're going to create a brand new sketch, single vertex. We're actually gonna move this, I think, along the y-axis before we get started too much here. So we're gonna put it there. And now we're gonna extrude it up this way. Maybe something like that. We're gonna extrude it in the Y direction this way, just to give it that little flat top. And then this time, instead of extruding it straight down, I'm gonna extrude it kind of back this way so that we have a little bit of overhang from our ends. That's a little extra thing that we didn't do last time. So, and then with that, we will make Manifold to solidify, or to fill it in at least. And now we can take this thing and solidify it, right? And we want it to go in both the X and Y, or I mean in both directions away from the Y axis this time. I'm gonna make it wider than it needs to be because I know that I'm gonna replicate it up this way and I want it to be at least as wide as this thing is. So we've got that, and then we can array modifier along the y-axis, it looks like is what we need, and we'll make probably just a couple copies of it, and we'll roll this down. So something like that seems just about perfect. Actually, now that I look at it, I'm going to go back in there again, and I'm going to pull these in just a little bit more. Something like that. Yeah, that seems good. Cool. So now, that's our basic shape. And then we need to cut some things away, right? So we'll go back again to this original frame. And I'm going to look at it straight from the top. And I'm going to duplicate it and then not move the copy. We're going to tab into here and hit Alt-Z. All right, so this is our cutting shape. And actually what I want to do with it is move this point down this way so that it's maybe about right here or so. Sure. I'm going to move this point. I'm just moving these slightly inside of the outer shape, just so that the cut will be a little bit more clean. So we're going to do something like that. Then again, we're going to remove a lot of these modifiers in our modifier stack. So we still need the mirror one because we want this to go both, to cover both sides of the trapezoid, but the rest of these we can remove. And so now we're left with just this shape here. Yeah, that seems good. And then we want to actually grab this. We're going to extrude it along the x-axis, I guess it is, over here to the origin, because we need this to be a solid thing. And then we're going to select all of them and fill them in, right? So now we have a solid face that we can use potentially as our cutter object. So now that we have that, we can solidify it, make it nice and big here, like this. There we go. And then we select that, and we select our fins. And we use that to cut away. So we want the intersection of those. So now we have that. That's looking pretty good. I'm still not crazy about the fact that these don't have a straight across cut to them. And so I can cut that again. There's a couple ways I could do that. Probably the easiest way for now will be just, let's go into this mode and let's create a new sketch again. So there's our single vertex. We're gonna move this vertex up this way. We're gonna put it like maybe here. We'll extrude it along the x-axis straight this way, like that. So this is the line where we want to cut that thing. And actually, I want it to be a little higher, so I'm gonna move it up along Y, like right about there. So that's where I want my outer frame to end, right? So I have this line here, and then we can do what we normally do, which is to profile extrude it along the Z-axis. So we move it up like this. We can solidify it. And we want it to only go in that direction. So we'll just make it nice and chunky so that it's definitely overlapping the thing that we want to remove. And then we can shift select this outer frame and go into the Booleans and say difference this time, because we're subtracting it away from that. And then again, we'll just hide this wireframe. So now we have that shape. So now we have a flat end here. We have our angled vents that we like. So yeah, that's what I had in mind to fit in that shape. Now, of course, the dimensions won't fit exactly. To do that, you'd have to take measurements and be more precise. But that's the basic flow for how I would create that sort of vent piece. So if you created yours in a different way, yeah, let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see what other approaches people took after going through, the rest of the content of these 2 episodes. Yeah, let me know how yours turned out. And with that, we're done for now with vents. We may come back to them in a more advanced capacity much later on in the series. But for now, we're going to move on to something else, a new topic for the next episode. So I hope to see you then. And until then, have fun with designing vent pieces in Blender to use for your kits. If you make anything interesting, share it with me. Again, remember hashtag Blender Gunpla on social media if you want to share images or pictures of your printed objects or whatever else you're working on. And I will be looking forward to seeing those there. Until next time, I'll see you later.